The street was quiet when the patrol car turned onto the block just after 7 in the morning. The houses in Columbia, Illinois, sat close together, with trimmed lawns and driveways where people were usually backing out for work around this time. But on May 5, 2009, the air outside 403 Robert Drive felt still. A neighbor stood in his yard, looking toward the Coleman house with a worried expression. He explained that he hadn't seen the boys come outside, and something felt wrong. He added that Chris Coleman, the father of the family, had called him from the gym. Chris said he'd been trying to reach his wife, Sherry, and wasn't getting any answer. He asked the neighbor to check the house. The officer walked to the front door. It was locked. He circled around to the back, noticing how silent everything was inside. When he reached the sliding glass door, he saw it was partially open. He stepped inside and called out. No response. The air felt heavy, and there was a faint chemical smell, like blood beginning to settle into drywall. As he moved farther into the kitchen, he saw the spray-painted threats on the walls. Black letters, sloppy and uneven, slashed across the surface. I told you to stop. Another read, You have paid. The messages looked staged, almost theatrical, but they didn't lessen the shock of what came next. On the living room couch lay Sherry Coleman, motionless, covered only by a light blanket. The officer reached for her wrist, but there was nothing. Her skin was cool. He moved quickly down the hall toward the bedrooms. In the first room, he found 11-year-old Garrett in his bed. A second later, in the next room, 9-year-old Gavin. Both boys were lying on their backs, as if they had gone to sleep and never woken. But the marks on their necks told the truth. All three, Sherry and her sons, had been strangled. By the time detectives arrived, Chris Coleman was on his way home from the gym. His job as the chief of security for televangelist Joyce Meyer made his schedule unpredictable, but he often exercised early in the morning. He said he'd left the house before dawn and had no idea anything was wrong. When officers intercepted him on the street and told him what they had found, he doubled over, collapsing onto the pavement as if the weight of the words crushed him. Witnesses saw him crying, shaking, gasping for breath. But grief and guilt can look similar in the first moments of a tragedy. Detectives had to watch closely. Inside the house, nothing was out of place except the painted threats. Drawers weren't dumped out. Electronics weren't stolen. There was no sign of a break-in, no footprints leading away from the property, no evidence that anyone had forced their way inside. Whoever killed the family had moved through the house quietly, calmly, and with familiarity. In the bedroom, detectives noticed that Sherry's phone was missing. A laptop was open on the kitchen counter, and investigators later learned Sherry had recently confided in friends and family that her marriage was unraveling. She said Chris was distant, angry, and often dismissive. She believed he was having an affair, and she wasn't wrong. Investigators found messages between Chris and a Florida woman named Tara Lintz, someone he had known since childhood, someone he now referred to as his future wife. He told her he would be free by the end of May. He promised her a new life. He sent photos, texts, and assurances that his divorce was coming soon. But divorce would have cost him his job. As the public face of a religious ministry's security team, Chris knew that an affair would ruin his reputation. Friends later said that his image mattered to him far more than his honesty. He was trained to look calm under pressure, to present a polished exterior. But underneath that role, the investigation revealed a man cornered between the life he wanted and the life he didn't want to lose. Then, there were the threatening emails. Months before the murders, Chris had reported receiving anonymous messages warning him to stop working for Joyce Meyer or his family would be harmed. He said the sender claimed Chris was interfering with God's will, but the emails came from an account created just minutes before each message was sent. Digital tracing showed they originated from a computer belonging to Chris himself. Investigators understood the tactic immediately: build a threat, establish a fictional enemy, and set the stage for a violent act that could be blamed on anyone else. When detectives interviewed him again, Chris maintained he had no involvement and insisted the threats were real. But every detail weakened his story. Security cameras at the gym showed his timeline didn't align with the calls he claimed to have made. His clothes from that morning were already in the washing machine when officers arrived at the home. His phone records contradicted his movements, and the paint used in the threats matched cans found in his garage. The most disturbing detail came from the medical examiner. The boys had been strangled first. Sherry was killed last, likely after fighting back. The order told investigators something about the killer's mindset. Eliminate the children first, quickly and quietly, then confront the spouse. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was controlled. Detectives believed Chris had woken before dawn, walked room to room, and ended every life in the house except his own. Then he drove to the gym to build an alibi he thought would hold. When Chris was arrested, he didn't cry. He didn't ask why. He didn't demand to see his family or insist on clearing his name. He sat calmly, staring straight ahead, as if the world had finally caught up to something he had been expecting. The trial drew national attention. Prosecutors described a man so determined to protect his image and so desperate to avoid consequences that he murdered his wife and children rather than admit the truth. They presented emails, phone records, surveillance, and testimony revealing an affair he had tried to hide behind lies and manipulation. The defense argued he had been framed, but the evidence stacked too high. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sherry's family wept quietly as the verdict was read. They had been forced to sit in the same room with the man who took everything from them: a sister, a daughter, a mother of 2 boys who never made it to middle school. They walked out of that courtroom knowing justice had been served, but nothing could repair the hole left behind. The Coleman home was eventually torn down. Too many people knew what happened inside. No one wanted to live with the echoes of that morning. In the years since, the case has become a study in the difference between image and reality, how a polished exterior can hide choices capable of destroying the very people someone claims to love. The Coleman family murders remain one of the most haunting domestic homicide cases in modern Illinois history, not because of what was taken, but because of who took it. Thank you for listening to Homicide Files. Subscribe for more true crime stories.